Hello there, Mr. Sutton here, bringing you the IM314 Extra Practice Number 2 solutions on solving word problems involving systems of equations. And this one's associated with a puzzle. So let me show you the puzzle. Here it is. So we're trying to answer the question, what did the lady say when a gentleman asked, what has teeth and flies through the air? We've got these six word problems involving systems of equations in two variables. And once we solve each of these, we need to cross out the box that contains the answer. So here's the boxes down here. Once we've crossed off, it looks like at least six of these, whatever's left over, we should be able to come up with an answer by putting those letters in these boxes in order. So let's give it the old college try. For this first problem, we have our good friend Rocky McFist, who comes up with these names, spending a total of $90 per week for karate lessons and ballet lessons, so combined $90 a week. If the amount spent on karate lessons increases $10 per week, it will be 2/3 of the amount spent on ballet lessons. How much does Rocky spend on ballet lessons? So let's start by defining our variables. So we need to talk about how much we're spending per week on ballet lessons. And in order to do that, we also need to talk a little bit about how much we're spending per week on karate lessons. Knowing both of those is kind of key to solving this. So I'm going to let K, or actually B, be my ballet price, and this is a weekly price. And then K will be my karate price per week. So going through the sentences here, we have a total of $90 per week spent on both karate and ballet lessons. So if I take the weekly price of the ballet and the karate and add those together, that should add up to 90. So I can write B plus K equals 90, and that's one of my equations. By itself, this won't be enough to solve for either variable, but it's a good start. Now the next piece of information they gave us is that the amount spent, if the amount spent on karate increases 10 per week, it'll be 2/3 the ballet price. So we have, if we take K and add 10 to that, we're just doing the weekly price for, they say increases by $10 per week. They're not saying like every week it goes up another $10. They're just saying like we have a one-time increase of $10 that gets carried over every week. So if we have K plus 10, that's the new weekly price, that would be 2/3 of the ballet price. So we can write that K plus 10 equals 2/3 times B. So setting this up was a little bit tricky. It's also kind of tricky to solve this because we've got this fraction and this second one's not even in standard form. I am going to solve this using elimination. You could use substitution, but whatever. So in order to do that, at some point I'm going to move this this B, 2/3 B, over to the left side. And I'll move the 10 over to the right side. I'm also going, at that point I'm going to have a negative 2/3 B, and I'm going to multiply this whole equation by 3 to get rid of that fraction. I'm just telling you what I'm doing, thinking ahead here, because that's going to affect what I do with this first equation. When I do all of that craziness, I'm going to end up with a negative 2b. I'm going to want something over in this equation that will cancel that negative 2b that I'm going to get in the future. A positive 2b would do the trick. So one of my first steps is I'm going to take this equation on the left and multiply this whole thing by 2, just kind of setting the stage for what I'm doing later on. So I've got 2b plus 2k equals 180. Now over here, as promised, from my next step, I'm going to move the b over to the left side and the 10 over to the right side. So I'll rewrite this as negative 2/3 b. The k is still over there on the left side, and now minus 10 to get it over to the right side. And now, as I also told you I would be doing, in order to get rid of this 3 denominator, I'm going to multiply this whole equation by 3. So that gives me negative 2b, because those 3's are going to cancel. This is going to be a plus 3k, and 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. At this point, now that I have these opposite-like terms here, I'm going to add these two equations together. So those b's are canceling. 2k plus 3k is 5k. 180 plus negative 30 is 150. And then if I divide both sides by 5, I have a k value that is 30. So $30 for karate lessons. Now I need to figure out how much the lessons are going to be for the ballet. So I need to plug this in somewhere. I'm going to plug it in right here. It doesn't really matter where I plug this in. Up here would also be an easy place, but I'm plugging it in over here just because I've got some room here. I probably made my life a little tougher just to save space. So negative 2/3 b plus 30 equals negative 10. Subtract 30 from both sides. We've got negative 40 over there. And I need to do a couple things now to get rid of this negative 2/3. I could multiply both sides by negative 3 over 2, but I'm just going to do it in 2 steps just to make it a little easier to follow. So I'll multiply both sides by 3. That'll give me a negative 2b on the left and a negative 120 on the right side. I multiplied this whole equation by just 3. Now I'm going to divide the whole equation by negative 2 to get rid of that. So I'm going to end up with then b equals 60. So that was what we were looking for, $60. That was the ballet lesson price. So let me go up here and see where $60 is at. It looks like that's right here with this E, so I'm going to cross off that box and move on to the next problem. On this one, we have Dr. D. Jones has a total of $3,000 invested in 2 stocks. Stock A pays dividends at the rate of 6% and stock B at the rate of 8%. If her dividends from the 2 stocks total $220 per year, how much did she invest in each stock? All right, so let's define our variables. We want to know how much she invested in each stock, the amount in each stock. So I'm going to let A represent the amount of money she invested in stock A, and B will be the amount she invested in stock B. So using these 2 amounts, we're going to come up with 2 equations that describe this situation. Now, my first sentence says that we have a total of $3,000 in both stocks. So if I take the amount in stock A and add to it the amount in stock B, that should add up to $3,000. So that's our first equation, A plus B equals 3,000. Not too nasty. But now we have this weird thing about dividends. So the basic idea is if I want to find out how many dividends I got from stock A, I have to take 6% of whatever I invested in stock A. So that would be 0.06A would be the amount of money, the dividends from stock A. And now if I want to add to that the dividends from stock B, well, that would be, following this percentage here, 0.08 times B. And now those 2 sources of revenue should add up, they said, to 220. So I can write that this equals 220. And at this point, I have a system of equations that I can solve. And I want to solve for both A and B. There's a lot of ways to do this. I'm going to use the elimination addition method here. So in order to do that, I need variables that are going to cancel out, and so far I don't have any. One way you could do this would be to first get this second equation so that I don't have decimals. I could multiply everything here by 100, and then I could multiply this other equation by something, but I don't really need to do that much work. I just need to figure out if I want to cancel out A or B. Since I have just one A and one B in this first equation, I can just multiply by one of the numbers over in the second equation, and I'll get things that'll cancel. I'm going to choose to get rid of the A's. So if I multiply this first equation by, we'll say, negative 0.06, that's going to give me a negative 0.06A from this A here that'll cancel this positive 0.06A. And next I have negative 0.06B. And finally, 3,000 times negative 0.06. You can use a calculator on this. If you want to do it without a calculator, one thing you could do would be to just move the decimal over, let's see here. Yeah, we'll just multiply by 6 and then move the decimal left to compensate for the fact that this was a decimal. So negative 6 times 3,000 would be negative 18,000, but now if I move the decimal left 2 on that, I've got negative 180. Again, though, you could use a calculator. All right, let's go ahead and add these equations together so those 0.06 A's will cancel. And if I have 0.08B plus negative 0.06B, that's just a straight subtraction there. We've got 0.02B. And then on the right side, 220 plus negative 180 is 40. Now at this point, I have to divide both sides by 0.02b. One thing I could do before I do this division, though, just to make my life a little easier, again, if I don't want to use a calculator, I could. If I move the decimal 2 places to the right on both sides of the equation, so basically multiply this whole thing by 100 first, then I would end up with 2b equals 4,000. And 4,000 divided by 2 would be 2,000. So that's just a mental trick you could use to not have to use a calculator. All right, now I'm not going to need a calculator for the rest of this. If I plug 2,000 back in over here, I've got a plus 2,000 equals 3,000. And then I can just subtract 2,000 to get an a value of 1,000. So at the end of this one, I invested $1,000 in stock A, 2,000 in stock B. And let me just put a dollar sign there. There we go. So at the end of this one, I could write this as an ordered pair if I wanted of 1,000, 2,000. The key is to have these in the correct order, A and then B. Looking at my boxes up here, I've got 1,000 and 2,000 in this first TH box. So let me cross that off. And I don't see that anywhere else, so let me move on. On this problem, we have a junky, crunchy sort of snack. I'm not sure really what that is, but the recipe for it requires 8 cups of sugar and flour together. And they said if the recipe had called for 1/4 cup more sugar, the amount of sugar would be half the amount of flour. So ultimately, we want to know how many cups of sugar does the recipe call for. All right, well, let's define some variables for these junky crunchies. So we're asking about number of cups of sugar and flour. So I'm going to let F be my cups of flour, the number of those, and then S will be how many cups of sugar I have. So let me set up some equations based on the information they've given us. So we're told that we require a total of 8 cups of sugar and flour together. So if I take these two quantities, F and S, and add them together, add up all the cups of flour and sugar, F plus S should equal 8, a total of 8 cups. Next, they said if we had called for a 1/4 more cup of sugar, the amount of sugar would have been half the amount of flour. So a 1/4 more sugar, we can express that as S plus 1/4, which isn't pretty, but we'll roll with it. And they said that this would have been half the amount of flour. So we can say that this quantity equals 1/2 F. All right, now we're going to go ahead and try to solve this system of equations. Ultimately, I'm going to use elimination addition on this one. So I'm going to get my second equation to be in standard form. So I need to move my 1/2 F over to the left side and my 1/4 over to the right. So I can rewrite this as S minus 1/2 F equals negative 1/4. And this will be my first step. All right, now what can I do with this? Well, I want variables that are going to cancel out. Nothing will cancel out right away. However, I notice that I have a positive S over here and over here. If I make one of those S's negative, then I can add the equations together and cancel out the S's. I have to make a choice, so I'm going to just take this first equation and multiply this whole first equation by -1. That'll make this a negative S. So this will be negative F minus S equals -8. And now I can go ahead and actually add these two equations right here together. When I do that, I end up with the S's canceling. So now I can add the F's together, negative 1/2 F minus 1 F. So that's really negative 1/2 plus negative 2/2. That's going to be negative 3/2 F. And then I have to do some fraction addition over here on the right side. So the common denominator between these two would be 4. I can think of this -8 as a negative 32/4. So negative 1/4 plus negative 32/4 would give me negative 33/4. All right, now I have to solve for F. And this just keeps getting messier and messier with these fractions. So a lot of things I could do here. The fastest way to get F by itself is just to multiply by the reciprocal of this negative 3/2. That would cancel it out and basically give us 1 F. So my reciprocal then is going to be, if I'm starting with negative 3 over 2, I need to multiply both sides by negative 2 over 3. On the left side, that just gives me f. That was the whole point, so that those would cancel. You'd end up with negative 6, actually positive 6 over 6, which is just 1. Now on the right side, negative 33 over 4 times negative 2 over 3. Well, let's do the numerator first. Negative 33 times negative 2 would give me 66. And in the denominator, 4 times 3 would give me 12. So positive 66 over 12. And I want to reduce that just to make my life a little bit easier. So I can reduce these by 6. This is going to be 11 over 2. And that's 11 over 2, or 5½ cups of flour. Now, that wasn't what they were asking for. They wanted to know cups of sugar. So I actually still need to find S by plugging my F back in. And this equation over here on the left is probably the easiest place to do that. So I can rewrite this as 11 over 2 plus S equals 8. And if I just subtract 11 over 2 from both sides, that will give me S. Again, I need a common denominator. Instead of thinking of this as an 8, I'm going to think of this as a 16 over 2. Then if I do 16 over 2 minus 11 over 2, I have an S value of 5 over 2. So that's 5 over 2 cups. Looking at my answer choices, I don't see 5 over 2 anywhere here. But 5 over 2 is also the same as 2½ if I write that as a mixed number. And I do have the 2½ right here under this A. So I'm going to cancel out this box and move on to the next question. For number 4 here, we have Ms. U.S. Bonds. That's an interesting name. Investing a total of $4,500, some at 9% per year and the rest 6%. They're telling us the return from the 9% exceeds that from the 6% by $180. We're ultimately trying to figure out how much she invested at each of these different rates, 9 and 6%. Okay, so let me come up with some variables to represent the things that we're talking about here. So we're looking to find out how much money she invested at each rate. So let me create a variable to represent the amount of money she invested at those. I'm going to use just X and Y. I can't really think of better letters to use on this problem. So X is going to be the amount we invested at 9%, where Y is going to be the amount we invested at 6%. And I just chose X and Y for the 9 and the 6 instead of the 6 and the 9 because that's the order that they told me about stuff in the problem. Okay, so what sentences can I write, what equations can I write based off the information they gave us here? So we're told that we had a total of $4,500. That means that the money at 9%, X, plus the money we invested at 6%, Y, all that money has to add up, has to equal $4,500. So that's one of the equations we can write. Now there's another equation. The return from the 9% exceeds that from the 6% by 180. How can we express that in terms of X and Y? So the return from the 9%, let's see if we can figure out what that should look like. So to find out how much I'm getting back from my 9% investment, I just have to multiply the total amount of that investment, X, times 0.09. I need 9% of X. So 0.09 times X will give me 9% of X. Next, we're told that this exceeds that from the 6% by $180. So we can write 0.09X equals the 6% investment. We can write that as 0.06Y plus 180. They said this 0.09 stuff was 180 bigger than the 0.06 stuff. So that's what that would look like as an equation. All right, so now we have to actually solve this system. To make my life a little bit easier, this second equation, I'm going to turn these decimals into non-decimals by multiplying this whole thing by 100. So if I do that, and by the way, I also moved the 0.06y over to the left side before I multiplied by 100, just so I have everything in standard form like my first equation here. So if I do multiply this by 100, that ends me with 9x minus 6y equals, let's see, this is just add 2 more zeros, 18,000. All right, if I add these equations together, nothing's going to cancel yet. However, if I multiply this first equation by either a 9 or a 6, then I'll get something that might cancel over here. Now, I've already got a negative 6y, so I'm thinking if I can just multiply by 6 on this first equation, a positive 6y is going to cancel that. That way I don't have to worry about multiplying by like a negative 9 or something. So let me multiply this first equation by positive 6. That gives me 6x, 6y, which is really what I was after by doing that. And then 6 times 4,500, well, let me think here. If I'm counting by 4,500s, I've got 4,500, 9,000, 13,500, 18,000, and then 22,500, 27,000 altogether. Or you could use the calculator, either way. All right, let's add those together. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. These y's are going to cancel. 9x plus 6x is 15x. And then 18 and 17 would be 45, so that's 45,000. And you could use a calculator, but I don't think I need one for this. 45 divided by the 15 here gives me 3, and I've got 3 more zeros to go after that. So we have x equals 3,000. That's how much we invested at 9%. Now we also need to figure out how much we invested at 6%. So if I plug my 3,000 back into this x plus y equation, that's as good a place as any. We have 3,000 plus y equals 4,500. And then we'll subtract 3,000 to get y equals 1,500. So we have 3,000 and 1,500 as our two answers in that order. Looking at my boxes here for those answers, I see 3,000, 1,500 under this ky, so let me just cross that off. For this one, we have Prince Neva Ben Rich taking out 2 loans. He borrows $800 more from a credit union that charges 12% interest than he does from a bank that charges 15% interest. And if his interest payments total are $420, we want to know how much he borrows at each rate. All right, there's a lot to unpack here. To help us start this untangling process, let's let some variables represent the things that we're trying to figure out. Ultimately, we want to figure out how much money we're borrowing at each rate. So I'm going to let x and y represent our 2 different amounts. We had some money we borrowed at 12% and some money we borrowed at 15%. Let's let x equal the amount of money we borrowed at 12%, and then y is the amount we borrowed at 15%. So now we're going to try to express everything in terms of the x and the y here so that we get some equations we can solve. So one thing we could do, one equation we could write comes from this first sentence, or I guess it's the second sentence. We borrowed $800 more from the 12% union than the 15%. So I can say that the amount I borrowed at 12%, x, is $800 more than the amount I borrowed at 15%. So equals, and then y plus 800. The amount at 12% is 800 more than the amount at 15%. There we go. That's one equation. Now my other equation comes from the sentence about the interest payments totaling $420 annually. So to get a sentence out of that, an equation out of that, let's talk individually about how much interest each of these different loans is producing. So to find the interest from the loan at the 12% bank, we would just have to multiply the amount that we borrowed from there by 0.12. So that would be 0.12x. And the interest from the 15% bank, that would be 0.15y, right? Because this is a different collection of money. So if we add those two together, 0.12x and 0.15y, that will give us the total money that we're paying in interest, the 420 here. So we can say equals 420. And now I have some things that I need to solve. So I noticed in this second equation I've got some decimals. I kind of want to get rid of those right away so I don't have to mess with them here on after. So to do that, for my first step, I'm going to multiply by 100 for this second equation here. So that moves all of my decimals 2 spaces to the right. So now instead of 0.12x, I can write 12x, and I can write plus 15y, equals, we also have to multiply 420 by 100, so that will be 42,000. So there's one equation that I can do a little bit more with in a second. Now, if I add this equation and the other equation here together, nothing's going to cancel. I guess I could use substitution method and replace this x with y plus 800, but that doesn't look too appealing to me either. It wouldn't be that difficult, but I love using the addition method, the elimination method in these situations. To get that process started, on this first equation, I need to get my y over to the left side so that it matches the same form as the equation on the right side. The letters on the left, the number on the right. So I'll have x minus y equals 800. And now I want something that's going to cancel out either the 12x or the 15y. Since I've already got a negative y right here, I'm just going to multiply by 15 so that this becomes a negative 15y. But I have to multiply everything by 15, so along with that, I've got a 15x. There's the negative 15y we wanted, and whatever 800 times 15 is. Well, let me think here. 800 times 10 would be 8,000. 800 times 5 would be 4,000. So that would be 8,000 plus 4,000 is 12,000 altogether. All right, or you could use a calculator. Adding these equations together now. Those y's are going to cancel. That's what we were trying to make happen. And we've also got 12x plus 15x. That's 27x. And 42 plus 12,000. That's going to be 54,000. Now to get x, I have to divide by 27. 54 divided by 27 would be 2. So then this is going to be x equals 2,000. I still need to figure out, so that's the amount I invested at 12%. To get my 15%, I have to plug this number back in. I think this equation here works just as well as any. And then I can solve for y. So I've got 2,000 minus y equals 800. Subtract 2,000 from both sides, so that's going to be negative 1,200. And then dividing both sides by negative 1, I have y equals 1,200. So if I were to write this as an ordered pair, which I don't have to, just to put it in order though, I've got 2,000 comma 1,200. Looking at my answer choices, let's see here, 2,000, 1,200, that matches this 2 answer box. So let me cross that off. And now I've only got one more problem left before I can solve the puzzle. For our final boss battle problem, we've got a book about Tony and Cleo donating some books to a hospital. So this doesn't sound too bad, right? I mean, we're moving away from like stock exchange stuff and just talking about books. How bad could it be? If Tony contributes half of his books and Cleo gives 1/3 of hers, they'll donate a total of 30 books. So we're talking about halves and thirds. We've got some fractions going on. And then if Tony, this is where it gets weird. Tony gives 2/5 of his books and Cleo has half of hers. They'll donate a total of 31 books. So clearly we've got two different collections of kind of the same information that we're going to use to write two different equations. Ultimately, we want to figure out how many books each of them has. Not how much they donated, but how much they actually have. So let's set up some variables to represent Tony's books and Cleo's books. We'll use T and C. T for Tony and C for Cleo, and this is the total number of books that they're starting with. And now we can use these sentences to write some equations. So if Tony contributes half of his books, so that would be 1/2 T. And Cleo gives 1/3 of hers, so that would be 1/3 T, or 1/3 C rather, it's Cleo's books. If we add those donated books together, they said that they would donate a total of 30 books. So we can write that 1/2 T plus 1/3 C equals 30. If you understand this first equation, writing the second one isn't so bad. It's just kind of the same idea with different fractions. So in this second equation, we have 2/5 of Tony's books, 2/5 T, plus half of Cleo's, 1/2 C, and this time it adds up to 31 instead of 30, so equals 31. Okay, so writing these equations, I mean, the fractions aren't great, but writing them wasn't so bad. Solving this system of equations is where it gets considerably messier. Ultimately, I decided to use the elimination addition type method here, where I try to get two equations that I add together and they cancel something out. But we have a ways to go before we can even dream of adding equations together. Let me start by getting rid of the fractions. I have a tough time doing this when fractions are involved. So to do that, for each of these equations, I'm going to multiply by the least common denominator, the smallest thing that all my denominators go into. And that'll cancel out my fractions. So for the equation here on the left, for 2 and 3, those denominators, the smallest thing those both go into is 6. So I'll multiply this by 6. When I do that, I've got 6 times 1/2. That's going to be 3t. And 1/3 times 6, that's 6 over 3, or 2c. So 3t plus 2c equals, and now this is a little easier, just 6 times 30 is 180. So that looks a little bit nicer. Still not where it needs to be, but we're getting better. Over here on the right side, this equation, this time I have a 5 and a 2 for my denominators. The smallest thing 5 and 2 go into is 10. So I'll multiply by 10 on this one. So 10 times 2/5, that's going to be 20 over 5, which is 4t. And then half of 10 is going to be 5, so 5c. And then 31 times 10, that's pretty easy. That's just 310. Now looking at my two modified equations, they look nicer. Unfortunately, if I were to just add these together, nothing's going to cancel. Nor does it look like there's a single number I could multiply one of these by, at least a whole number that would make things cancel out. So what I'm going to do is multiply each of them by a different number. Before I do this, I need to decide whether I want to get rid of the t's or the c's. I'm choosing to get rid of the t's. So this 3t and this 4t, I want to turn these into some numbers that will actually cancel out. To do this, let me just think of the smallest number that 3 and 4 both go into. That would be 12. So if I could make this maybe a 12t and maybe this is a negative 12t, then I could get things to cancel. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm actually going to make this one a positive 12 and this one a negative. It doesn't really matter though. So to make this a positive 12t, I have to multiply this equation by 3. So that's going to be 12t plus 15c, and then 3 times 310 is going to be 930. Now over here on this other equation, if I have positive 12t here, I want this 3t to be a negative 12t, and maybe put that down below so that I can add those. So to make this negative 12t, this one gets multiplied by negative 4. So that's negative 12t I have now. Negative 4 times 2c is negative 8c. And then 180 times negative 4, you might need a calculator. That comes out to negative 720. Adding these equations together, finally, the 12t's are canceling. 15c plus negative 8c is 7c, so that's not so bad. And then 930 plus negative 720, that's 210. Now, thankfully, 210 is easily divisible by 7. That gives us a c value of 30. So this tells us that Cleo had 30 books that she started with. And then we have to figure out Tony's books. So let's plug C in, 30 for C, somewhere else. It doesn't really matter where you plug it in. They're all kind of gross. I'm just going to use this equation here because I've got some room underneath that I can do some work in. So I've got 3t plus 2 times 30 equals 180. 2 times 30 is 60. 180 minus the 60 gives us 120 over there. And then 120 divided by 3 gives us a t value of 40. So Tony had 40 books. So looking at 40 and 30, that answer is going to be up here, the AT, 40 and 30. So there it is. All right, so we've already got 6 things crossed off, and there's nothing else to cross off. At this point, we just have to look through here, line up the letters, and see how that solves this puzzle. So we've got A, F, and then L-Y. That doesn't seem like it could all be one word, so I suspect that my first word is just the letter A. And then F-L-Y, I've got fly, but maybe there's more to this word. We have an I-N and then a G-S, so maybe flying is the next word, I think. Now we have this stray S just kind of hanging around here. We also have an A and a W and another S. And then we also have this IR over here. So I think the next word is S-A-W, saw. It doesn't make sense to have an S after that if this IR is all by itself. So you got a flying saw and then SIR, sir. Okay, so what did the lady say when a gentleman asked what has teeth and flies through the air? A flying saw, sir. There we go, because he's a gentleman. All right, very nice.